prueba de sonido. Este es mi micrófono. Dani habla y por favor indícale a Stefan que hable.
Okay, hello, we are doing a audio test. Can you hear me? Stefan, can you talk so we can...
Yeah, test. Check. Can you hear me? Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Listo, yo me escucho perfectamente, tú te escuchas y Stefan también.
Everything's good.
Perfect.
Listo, en 1080, audio perfecto. Yo creo que ya podemos iniciar. Entonces, vale, voy a ubicarme aquí para estar viendo los datos. Vamos a poner el chat por aquí. Hoy no voy a poner música por si acaso. Listo. Tenemos ya nuestro XSplit perfectamente. Listo, voy aquí a hacer una mini modificación, lo van a ver en pantalla. Okay. Listo. Listo. Esperemos unos 5 minutos mientras sigue llegando gente. ¿Les parece bien?
¿Listo? ¿Ya estamos live?
Sí, ya estamos live. Ya tenemos audio y video perfecto. Entonces, demos 5 minutos mientras sigue llegando estudiantes e iniciamos. ¿Listo? Iniciamos, como te comenté, yo saludando y ya pues te doy la entrada a ti, Dani.
Listo.
So,
Okay, we are live right now, but we will wait about 5 minutes to people to come.
Llega la Escuela ZBrush, donde podrás aprender desde cero con acompañamiento online en vivo. Para ello, indicarás tu curva de aprendizaje y vivirás una experiencia totalmente diferente con Level Academy. Eso sí, te pido que te quedes hasta el final del vídeo para conocer todos estos detalles y también te voy a decir cómo conseguir entradas totalmente gratuitas al final del vídeo. Y ahora me preguntaréis, ¿pero qué incluye esta escuela ZBrush? Pues mirar, evaluación de tu nivel para reforzar tu curva de aprendizaje, acompañamiento online en vivo, acceso a Discord Premium, contenido que se adapta a tu nivel y lo más importante de todo, no importa que estés a nivel 0, intermedio o avanzado, ya que nosotros nos adaptamos a vosotros y sobre todo, lo que más queremos es que evolucionéis como artistas y profesionales. Os acompañaremos en todo el proceso, desde el inicio hasta el final, estaremos con vosotros y bueno os voy a dar una pista de lo que vamos a hacer en esta escuela de ZBrush. Pues iniciaremos un busto hiperrealista pasando por todo el proceso de producción, desde la preproducción con la idea inicial hasta la postproducción con el render y acabado final de nuestro modelado. Y lo prometido es deuda, chicos, ahora os voy a revelar cómo poder adquirir pases totalmente gratuitos para esta escuela de ZBrush. Level Academy sorteará diferentes entradas de manera online en su presentación de esta escuela de ZBrush, que por cierto tenéis el link de registro en la misma caja de información de este mismo vídeo. Y bueno, ¿cómo vamos a conseguir entrar en este sorteo? Pues mira, chicos, muy fácil. Para ello deberéis de cumplir unos sencillos pasos. 1. Darle like al vídeo. 2. Comentar este mismo vídeo con el hashtag Escuela ZBrush Level, máximo 3 por persona. Y por último, acceder al link de registro que os vais a encontrar en la cajita informativa de este vídeo para poder acceder a la sesión informativa de la escuela ZBrush. Y bueno, chicos, os vuelvo a repetir, el sorteo se hará el mismo día de la sesión informativa de esta escuela de ZBrush. Así que, chicos, se despide un servidor. Espero que os haya gustado muchísimo el vídeo, la iniciativa del Level Academy, que yo creo que es lo más importante. Y nada, espero veros muy pronto. Así que, chicos, chao, chao, un saludo.
Vale, muy buenos días a todos. Por favor me confirman cualquier cosa, si me escuchan bien. Bien, el día de hoy vamos a tener algo diferente. Hoy vamos a tener nuestro primer live en inglés. Y para eso, el día de hoy nos está acompañando Daniela. Entonces, Daniela, bienvenida.
Hola, ¿qué tal todos? And hi everyone. We are here in our first live in English with our guest, Stefan. Stefan today is gonna talk with us about a really interesting topic. Hi, Stefan.
Hey.
All right, so we will like the public to get to know a little bit about Stefan and about his work. We found that really interesting, and I hope you too. So let's start by talking about who is Stefan and where are you from?
Yeah, I'm from Vienna in Austria. And I actually had to look it up today, but I started 9 years ago in the industry. So that's longer than I thought it would be, actually. And I started out as a tester in a small gaming studio. Basically, just I always knew I wanted to do art back then, but since there weren't any positions open, I thought I would just get my foot in the door doing testing, and then I transitioned over to the art side of things. And yeah, I mean, the last more than 6 years, I've been working at a outsourced studio here in Vienna. And yeah, I've been doing loads of Overwatch skins, one Fortnite skin, and like the last 1.5 years, I guess, I was mainly doing Valorant. So yeah, lots of stylized stuff that I did. And yeah, pretty all over the place, I guess. So I wouldn't categorize myself really as like a character artist or weapon artist or something like that, because I mean, I also worked as a texture artist on Forza Horizon 4, for example. So I'm more of a generalist with maybe a bit of a hard surface character focus in a way. So yeah, not so much environment, but everything else basically.
Great. And can you tell us about a project that you have been working lately that's really exciting for you?
What I have been working on lately. Well, I mean, the stuff that I've been working on lately isn't out yet, to be honest, because there's always like, depending on how the different studios schedule their stuff, it tends to like take 1 or 2 months to maybe even half a year, depending on how they release their stuff. So lately, that's all under wraps still.
And well, can you tell us a little bit about the dynamic with the work that you do with the studio? How is it? How is, for example, a day in your job?
Well, basically, it obviously depends on the project you're working on, because some clients have pretty, I'd say, rock solid concepts where they say, this is exactly what we want, build us this and nothing else. And some are a bit more loose, where you get maybe a rougher concept, or maybe the concept isn't working in like the technical constraints as much. So you have a bit more room to play around with what you're getting. But generally, like the most things we do at the moment is skins. So that would be for Valorant, for example, it would be weapon skins. On Overwatch, it's and also Fortnite, it would be character skins for all the various characters. And in a senior position, it's basically you have your own tasks, like you're doing a skin, for example, and as soon as you hit like a milestone where you finish the high poly or whatnot, you send it over to the client for feedback, and then you work that in until you get to the next milestone, and it's basically a rinse and repeat until the thing is done. That's like the very simple version of how it's working, because there's always like things to figure out, how to do things visually. Like maybe you have a material on your character that hasn't been done in the game yet. So you have to kind of figure out how you want to approach this. And especially with stylized games, they tend to have a very specific look. So even if you have like Overwatch and then you have Valorant or even Fortnite as well, they might be stylized games in a way, but they're all very different from each other. So you instantly recognize them. And this is one of the things you actually have to really focus on and immerse yourself in the art style and really work within those bounds in a way. And I mean, apart from like the work I do personally, it's also a lot of overseeing like younger artists. So there's obviously like a lot of internal feedback and mentoring going on. So it's in a way you tutor inside of the studio all the time to make them better.
All right. Tell us about your favorite experience, the most exciting experience that you ever have in with the industry.
My most exciting experience. That's an interesting one. It's my most exciting. I mean, one that's, if I look at my portfolio, that's pretty special for me is the Reaper skin here. Because with a lot of skins, there is at least some elements that you incorporate from like the base character, for example, especially like faces or body parts and such. But this one was actually pretty special because there's nothing on this that belongs to the base character. So this is like 100% done by me. Obviously, referencing the original one for sure. So there's like all the proportion and everything, but it's not like parts of the helmet are reused or anything. So this was actually quite a cool experience to have like a completely self-made thing in that case.
That's great. All right. Let's see a little bit about your portfolio now, and you can tell us a little bit about each design that you want to highlight.
I mean, this one down here is actually the first piece I ever did when I came to the studio. So this was, I think, even before Overwatch released. And I was not really experienced back then coming into the studio, and it was all new and exciting. And then they're like, "Yeah, you're doing an Overwatch skin." And I was like, "What, Overwatch?" So it was pretty scary and pretty exciting, but also a very cool first task to start on the job, doing like something for Overwatch. Yeah, apart from this one, I mean, like all the different weapons down here basically all have kind of a very similar workflow. This one was pretty interesting because it was actually more of a creature than like a hard surface weapon. So I don't believe they had done anything like that beforehand. So it was a lot of figuring out how we will approach this, and also obviously the technical constraints to get it into the budget without losing any of the shapes and stuff. And it came out pretty fun because the eye is also animated and blinks and moves around. So this was a very fun challenge, and also a lot of ZBrush work in there for sure. So this is probably one of my favorites.
Yeah, actually, we just post a little bit of the video that is in there in that design.
You mean this one?
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, exactly. You can see the eye moving around. Obviously, animation was all done by Blizzard on this one, and the rigging, but yeah, still cool to get it. Yeah, so this was actually yeah, I think the body ended up being completely done in ZBrush actually, like all the organic parts in the end, obviously, like blocking in Maya beforehand.
Cool, very cool.
Let's see. I mean, the next one is also to like, before we go to the characters, this was interesting because it was more of a fantasy style thing. Because generally on Overwatch, you have more like the techie sci-fi kind of pieces. And this was cool because it had like bone, leather, and fur bits on it. So this was a pretty interesting change. And also to figure out a way to like get all these fur and bone pieces in there and still have it editable enough in a way that you can, it's not like super high sculpted and everything. And then you get feedback and it takes you ages to like fix everything the way they wanted to have it. So even for stuff like this, modeling is kind of key to having it still in a state where it's reworkable, because a lot of things look cool, like tool-wise, when you see them in a demo or something, But as soon as you have to have like maybe 3, 4, or 5 iterations of feedback on a piece, if you're not flexible enough with your workflow, it can quickly add up. So this is something that everyone should look into and see how, how dynamic your work still is while you're doing it. Obviously, for portfolio pieces that you do on your own at home, it's not so much of a problem, but in a production, it's pretty much key to anything you do.
So it's always important to listen to the feedback.
Well, yeah, of course, but even like being able to do the feedback in like a short time frame, because if you get feedback and you take a week or something for a few little bits, yeah, they won't be too happy, I guess. So keeping everything flexible is pretty important on things like that. Yeah, what else? This is probably my most famous skin that I've ever done. I mean, not alone, obviously. There's also Julian Berger, who helped me out on this one, and I think the weapon was done by someone else as well. But this one was pretty difficult, especially with all the haircuts for the feathers and stuff. So this is a mix of like haircuts and sculpted pieces underneath. So this became pretty complex pretty quickly. But I think it's also one of the coolest ones that I've done. So it was worth it.
Great job.
And what else? I think this one was actually the first one I did for Valorant. The Spectre. And those are pretty fun, simply because they there's always a lot of work that goes into like a single skin line that's more or less like a little universe almost, where they I'm not sure how far they take it with like every skin line, but there's basically even background lore to some of those. And so Riot is very much on top of the game with all the like thinking they do and the whole world building more or less for even like a skin line. So this is always pretty fun to work on with them. And also pretty unique always.
So about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to know about something specific on any of the pieces, let me know.
Let's see if there is some questions that the audience have. Kelly, ¿me podrías mirar dónde puedo mirar las preguntas? All right. So if the audience have any questions, please ask now. And after answering some questions, we will be starting with the topic. So here is a question. Where did you do the retopología? Hold on, let me translate that.
Yeah, I mean, retopology. It's basically, I mean, I can show you on the asset that I have here. So basically, this is just like a showcase weapon that I can basically show you a few of the things, like workflow-wise, that I do. I guess, are we talking more about hard surface or more like character work? Because on hard surface things, I would say in most of the cases, you can actually just basically use your high poly. And like, if I just duplicate this piece and start kicking some of my support loops in there, I get kind of like a low poly version of what I have underneath, and then it's more or less just a question of getting a bit more resolution in there. So obviously this is way too low, so I would go in and like add some spans in here. Obviously you would want to span this out like evenly. There's various tools you can use for this. Like in this polytools thing, you can just even the spacing pretty easily. And yeah, then it's basically it's always Maya. I mean, you can obviously do the same thing in Blender, no problem. But most production, I would say, is still in Maya at the moment. I mean, there's obviously a big shift towards Blender, like in the last few months, but yeah, it's if your studio goes the Blender route, then yeah, sure, you do it in Blender. But it's a 3D package can manage it either way. And for I mean, for characters and stuff, I would probably use the live surface. I mean, you can do this here as well if you, let's say you smooth this out and use it as a live surface, and then you can just snap it on there, for example, and work like this. But I don't, to be honest, since the live surface thing came in, I don't use, like, for example, Topogun anymore, which was pretty good back in the day because Maya didn't have the functionality. But it's, I think you can stay inside your main 3D package for that stuff now.
Right, there is another question here. It says, have you used Blender for the same task?
Not really, to be honest. I've used Blender like ages ago. I think there was probably 7 years ago or something. So not since they had the big update. Would I recommend Maya? I think if you're starting out now and you're not like working at a company that exclusively uses Maya, for example, I would actually work in Blender simply because it's free. And it's it has a lot of features now, like even sculpting and stuff like that. So there's no really, not really a reason why you wouldn't want to use it. Obviously, if you get in a studio that uses Maya afterwards, you'll have to relearn it anyways. But I myself, I've worked in Cinema 4D, then in Maya, then I had to switch to 3ds Max because of the studio that I was working back then. Then I had to switch back to Maya again because the other studio was using Maya. So I guess if you get the basics with a bit of like a grace period, you can do the same thing in every package. So it's not so important where you do your stuff, but more how you do it. So I guess all the like sub-D modeling, you can do it in any package. There's obviously some pros and cons to each. Like, for example, 3ds Max having the layer stack that also Blender has is super excellent because you don't really have that in Maya. But yeah, I guess Blender, because it's easy to get a hold of, and then whatever's needed. How long is the weapon normally traded? That's actually a difficult one to. I mean, it really depends, to be honest, because if you look at like, for example, this one here. This one has a lot of, maybe I can show that in the video real quick. This has a lot of animation, especially on the scope, for example, which opens up when you equip the weapon and stuff. And in this case, it was, well, quite a complex task to get it all working in the constraints that we have with like the silhouette and poly count and all that stuff. So this obviously takes a lot longer than, let's say, maybe a throwing star, which is super easy, obviously. But I would say at least a month, but no really like hard fast rules. So depends on the asset and yeah, the skin line, obviously, whatever, but a month to open-ended depending on feedback, etc. And yeah, complexity and all.
All right, let's answer one more question and we can start with the topic.
Well, I mean, it's, I would say at least a month for one weapon. So not like a whole package or anything, but I couldn't even tell you on this anymore how fast they were. So don't, yeah, it's, it really depends. But I guess if you wanna like time yourself and you wanna do like a weapon like this, see if you can do it in a month, like from blocking out everything. Like when you have your concept ready, see if you can do it in a month to the finished textured version. If you can get there, cool. If you do it in 6 weeks is also good. But I guess if you're taking 3 or 4 months, you might need to speed it up a bit. So, yeah.
All right. So now we'll let you start with the topic and you can continue freely showing us the topic you prepared. Sounds good?
Yes. So basically, I'll just give you a broad overview of how I would generally approach like a hard surface weapon type asset in a stylized art style, that is, because obviously there's I would say like a few general rules you wanna always adhere to when doing stylized artworks versus like realistic stuff, like if you look at Battlefield or even Call of Duty, stuff like that. So this is more on the bit more unrealistic spectrum, if you want to call it that. Basically, when you're starting on one of these weapons, the first thing you do is always a blockout. This one is already the high poly here, so this is movable. But before you start with any of that, you would do a blockout, which obviously takes in consideration where is the player hand going to be. Is there an existing weapon that already uses a specific animation that has to work with this asset that I'm building, or maybe I'm free to do everything from scratch, so there's not so many like constraints on the whole thing. But in general, you always want to have like a rough, basically it's like a you're building a kind of low poly, a rough one that you can already put into the game and test animation and see if like the silhouette works. So in this example, I would obviously have the blockout in game with like a silhouette like this and check if it covers up too much of the screen or whatnot. So depending on the project, there's various constraints there. And as soon as you're basically done with your blockout, you start doing the high poly. And in this case, it's all like very general or basic hard surface sub-D modeling. So there's always support loops. And in Maya, you have like the smooth preview. And you have to check that everything shades correctly for baking afterwards. So you basically just proceed from your blockout with like converting those into smoothable objects. And as soon as you're done with your primary things, you add details like these floaters, for example. And this is like a pretty unique thing for game art. I'm not sure if you're familiar with floaters. It's basically a way to have detail in your normal map that you don't necessarily model into your shapes as such. So here, for example, the grip is completely flat, and then I have this diamond pattern just, well, floating over the actual object. And as you can see, this is very roughly cut because I have another floater on top of it, which basically just, it's basically just a slanted small surface that suggests like a cut in the material. And in the end, this will basically just be baked down like this. So anything that doesn't show in this view will not be visible in the normal map. And you can use this on a variety of like different places. Like, for example, even if you have complex shapes like this, you could obviously model this in. But if it's just a very small thing, you could just do a floater like this. And if you're always seeing it from an angle that makes sense, more or less, you can get away with stuff like this. Because obviously, as soon as you're looking from this direction, it would have to disappear, which it doesn't if it's only in the normal map. So you'll have to be careful where you want to use this type of thing. You can also do it like additive, like on top, sticking out. And this will also bake just fine, especially if you're doing like a little bevel like this one, where it already smooths out the transition for that stuff. And another really good example is connection floaters, where you basically have two shapes meeting. And obviously in the real world, two pieces that don't like they don't just stick into each other like with a perfectly sharp corner. So if you have like a little slanted surface around here that suggests like a cut in one of the shapes, it looks like the other one is stuck into the first one. And that basically just makes it look more integrated. Even here, for example, because this thing would have to be put in there during manufacturing somehow, so it makes sense to have like a little inset for that piece. Also, you can do like little surface detail like this, or those slits, and also these in the front, because this is something that adds a lot of visual interest to your piece, but is super easy to do. For example, I mean, these pieces, this is just a very simple pill shape. And as soon as you have those around here, it already looks more interesting. The same goes for these pieces, for example. So this is just a super simple shape in general, but as like a little detail, it looks pretty nice. Yeah. So as soon as you're done with your high poly, you would go and create your low poly. Like I've shown you before, you basically either work from your high poly and then kick out the support loops, or even go back to your blockout and start from there if that already has like the spans in there that you need. Because maybe, for example, on this piece, I don't need that many spans for the grip for it to shade properly and have the curve that I want. But maybe in my blockout, I already had a few more spans in there. So I kind of know how many polys the final low poly will have, more or less. And then I can also work from that. Or maybe you start something from scratch. But for hard surface stuff, I would say in general, you would more or less take an existing shape and work from there. What you might want to do is, in this case, if you look over here, I actually beveled some of the edges where it made sense in the low poly. So for example, if you're looking in the first person view, which is obviously the most important one for a weapon, these like corners around here and also up here, these down here and here, are basically the most important one, where they define the silhouette of your piece. So it makes sense to add a bit more geometry and bevel those edges, especially since they are pretty soft. So this is also, I think, one of the main things to keep in mind for stylized hard surface modeling is to soften the edges, because there's a lot of student work that I see where they copy maybe something from Overwatch or Fortnite, and it almost every time has super crisp, sharp edges. And as soon as you get like at a certain distance from the camera, it doesn't even look like there's a normal map on there, because you can't see an edge bevel, because it's so super sharp and fine that basically having like just a hard edge more or less does the same thing visually. So always look for soft edges, and because if I zoom out like this, you can still see the roll-off. This is still a nice soft edge. Obviously on this one, not so much, but you have to have a bit of distinction as well. So always check from a distance if all the stuff is still readable that you do. And I would say better go a bit too soft than too sharp, because this is like a pretty common mistake. And also use like the edge sharpness to define your materials. So for example, on this one, the grip down here is rubber. So this is more or less the softest material on the whole thing. So it makes sense to give it a very soft edge. So even if you just look at it, you already feel that this is a soft material because it has soft edges. On the other hand, this one is like a metal material. So this has way sharper edges, and you can already see that this is a hard material. That is, if you were to touch it, it would probably be pretty solid and hard, and this one would be way softer. So this is like a bit of, maybe not call it visual storytelling, but a way to already give like a hint to what this material is supposed to be and differentiate them within the gun and have a bit of visual variety on the whole thing. So, and yeah, as soon as you're done with your low poly, I mean, this one now stands at, yeah, a bit of a over 9K in this case. You could probably still go up for like maybe 10K with this one. For bigger stuff, obviously, you could do like 15K or even more. This really depends on the engine and the game. I would say for like a portfolio piece, make sure it's that your radiuses and edges are round enough so that it looks good when you see the texture thing. For example, if you had like less spans on like the cylinder than I have here, you probably start seeing a lot of the low poly edges. So if you're not under some really tight constraints, make it look nice. That's basically the most important thing for a portfolio piece, to make it look good. And if like a studio sees you can work with a certain pipeline, cutting like a few thousand polys will not be like the main problem you will have when working on an asset, most of the time at least. Yeah, so this is basically the final low poly. If we look at the UVs, one of the probably most important things for stylized assets are actually the UVs, because as you can see, I straighten a lot of the stuff. So obviously where there's a big angle, those are still in. But for example, this is like the whole body, which is pretty angular anyways. But if you were to just flatten this one, it would all be a bit janky and not really that nice looking. So if you have something like this, where a straight edge really is a straight edge, this will help a lot with baking. Because if you have a 2D image, which is made up of pixels, as soon as you're not in a horizontal or vertical line, you will have a bit of stair stepping. I mean, you can see it on those lines, for example. I don't know if you can see this on the screen, but obviously this line is perfectly smooth. And as soon as the line gets at an angle, you get a bit of stair stepping. So everything that is in a super straight line will always also bake super nice and straight. And this will basically just help you with having a super clean normal map. And even if you have to fix some stuff afterwards, it's easier to do. So especially in a in most modern, like in Substance Painter, for example, where you do most of your stuff in 3D painting anyways, you're not so focused on having everything 100% distortion free. So if you get a little bit of distortion, but have super nice clean lines, it's preferable, because with projections, 3D painting, and also a lot of the stuff coming out of the baking maps anyways, this is way more important. So always try to have a super clean, nice UV layout, because this is, I've seen this with a lot of people that start out and they bake stuff, and you get like this little tiny errors here and there, which at first glance, they're not really noticeable. But if you really look into it, and especially if you're working for AAA stuff where they expect the highest quality, and you also want to do the highest quality, obviously, this is like the little thing that gets you the last few percent to the finished line. Okay, yeah, for baking, I guess it's pretty straightforward. I do most of my bakes in Marmoset Toolbag at the moment, but obviously you can bake inside of Maya as well. Even XNormal, for example, is maybe a bit of an older program, but still for some pretty complex cages, it was actually the only program that pulled off the bakes. So I don't know what happens in XNormal, but it's kind of, it's difficult compared to like Toolbag to really get something done quick, but it's for more difficult stuff, it's still kind of magic. So yeah, it's the more tools you can have, the better, I guess. But yeah, mostly Marmoset Toolbag, which is basically straightforward. Just have your bake explosion. I do that simply in Maya, which is just the different pieces for baking exploded like this. In this case, it's also maybe interesting to see where you actually want to split your stuff, because obviously you won't bake the whole piece in one big chunk, because pieces will bake on top of each other and stuff like that. And also where you have maybe you get a nice material change, for example, so you have a different UV shell to this one. It often makes sense to just split this off and bake it on itself, because you don't get any like bleeding from the other materials, for example. Yeah. Also, pretty important, there's like the one thing that a lot of people starting out have a bit of difficulty with is hard edges or smoothing groups in 3ds Max versus soft edges and UV cuts. This is like a pretty big fundamental thing. As soon, obviously, as you split off your mesh for baking, you will have to have a hard edge there in the final thing, because basically what a hard edge is splitting off your mesh internally without showing you. So basically this is the same as having a hard edge here. And you can have hard edges as well without splitting stuff off, obviously. But as soon as you have a hard edge somewhere, like in this case, this is just around here, you have to have a UV split. So this would obviously also bake if I have this completely soft. But as soon as I have the hard edge here, I have to split this off in the UV editor. So very, very important, because otherwise you will have like a really nasty artifact in here. And yeah, obviously hard edges on your stuff is mainly when you come to a 90-degree angle. So anything that's below a 90-degree angle, for example, I wouldn't necessarily have to have a hard edge here, but it's basically just to, do I even have one here? Yeah. So it's, since I have one down here, it's just, it just shades the whole thing a bit better. And a good indicator for if you need a hard edge or not is just the shading. Because if I have this all soft, you can see like the way the shading has to span over all these different surfaces is not really ideal. And if you compare it to the one before, this is super nice and clean. And this basically just helps the normal map out with doing its job. So 90 degrees is always a good idea for a hard edge. And obviously, as soon as you have a hard edge, make a UV split. Boom. Yeah, then as soon, I mean, I won't show you the, or I can actually show you the tool bag thing real quick. So this is basically just very simple. Do your baking groups, put those things in there. For your floaters, you will actually want to paint in the skew. So as you can see, all of the floaters painted in red, where it's basically, it just switches the baker from geometry to surface normals, which you have in Maya, for example, and it just comps the two together. Because if I don't paint this in, he will actually skew those to the side, and then I might have, for example, one side being thinner than the other because he warps it to one side, for example. And I think I have, yeah, this would be like the finished thing in here. I generally bake out a material ID, ambient occlusion. Thickness, I'd say, is probably the one you don't need that often. Like a lot of generators in Substance Painter, I haven't really seen a lot of difference if I have that map in or not. Position map is pretty good. And the object normal map and obviously the normal map are also very important, because we will generate a lot of the texturing for this weapon from the maps. So this is what I would call a bake-driven texturing workflow, where you don't do that much manual painting or hand painting. So there's a lot of generating out of those maps, and then more or less just place a few things here and there, and then you're more or less done, I say. Yeah, and as soon as you have your bakes ready, it's over to Substance Painter. And just like with the modeling, where you basically for stylized stuff want to have the soft edges, and also, I mean, as you can see, a lot of the shapes are pretty blocky and big and read well from a distance. There's not like super intricate hard surface pieces, so everything is still easily readable. And the same goes for the texturing, because this is also with the sharp edges. Quite often come the grainy, very fine textures, and this is also something that you want to avoid with stylized texturing, because you have obviously in real life and in more realistic games as well, you have very grainy textures that where almost every pixel has like a different color. And this is something that you want to avoid and go more for like soft gradients, edge highlighting, and even just like everything else is stylized, also the dirt, for example, should be stylized to a certain extent. In here, I've created some, if it shows us this, yeah. I've created a few Splatter Alphas that I use for this thing. So if you look at this, you can see that there is even like a jagged, sharp edge that doesn't look realistic at all, but it goes with the whole stylized theme. So you have even in those little shapes, you will see very geometrical shapes, and they fade out really softly on one side and have a very, very hard edge on the other side. So nothing like you would see in nature, for example, but something that plays into the whole theme. Yeah, so with that in mind, I'll just show you more or less the anatomy of one of those materials. Maybe the painted metal, so this is the red one, for example. And all those materials more or less have the same structure. I mean, we can look into some in detail if you like later on. But the first one is generally always a color gradient, because, wait, I actually have to go back a bit. If we remove the whole material here, there's a base folder underneath here. And in there, I have what you generally call a point light or top light. And this is basically, as you can see, it's just a grayscale map from like a light coming down from like center. And this, you can actually do this in a few different ways, but generally you would just use the world space normal, because the world space normal is oh, sorry, it's the wrong one. If you look at the standard tangent normal map, this basically only has like the bevels and everything in there. But the world space normal map is actually 3 black and white gradients, one for the X, one for the Y, and one for the Z axis. And this, so the way you have everything oriented in space, that's the way it will actually bake everything down. So if you look from the top, you can see that everything's green. From here, it's kind of yellow and then gets red, purple underneath. And we basically just extract the y-axis gradient, which is light on top and dark at the bottom. And this is basically our shading base for everything we do with this whole piece. Also, there's some additional AO in here, which, for example, like a contact AO, so you get a bit more depth to your shading where the pieces meet. and this basically looks like this in the end. So it also has a bit of the top-down gradient in there, and then the connection stuff. And so this is like the most important thing, having your base done, and then more or less just layering stuff on top. In this case, the first thing that is done sorry, wrong channel, is basically a color gradient. And this is just a very simple free color gradient that maps the colors you select down here on top of the black and white one. So I could go in here and make this blue, for example. So the further towards white it gets, the bluer it gets. Obviously, this doesn't look too nice in this case. So you generally want to have it in like a spectrum here. Then you want to have like a, depending on what type of shader model you're using, but if you're using PBR roughness metallic, you would get yourself like a base value for all the different materials, because it's always a good idea to, in the beginning, check which material will be where on your mesh, and then have like it wouldn't look all too good if you have a metallic surface, then next to it another metallic, and then another metallic. So in this case, for example, I have the painted metal, then I have the bare metal, then it's this plastic kind of material. Then I can go from the plastic to the metal again, back to the painted metal, then we have rubber here. So there's always, if you look at the metallic map, you have like contrast. So it's not all metallics in one spot and all the non-metallics somewhere else. So it's always going from one to the other, which is makes it easier to differentiate the materials from a distance, and also breaks up the whole thing a bit nicer. So in this case, I actually decided I like the shading, but not the color. So I just went in and switched it up to a different one. And then the first thing I did was add gradients, one to the front and one to the back. So this is basically just a simple gradient, but again, not something you would necessarily put into a color map in a traditional PBR realistic texturing, but for something like this, very cool to have like a bit of color variation in there. Then the next one is just a bit of different color on top, and already you can see there's a lot of things going on. So you have the original point light, then you have the gradient, now you have a slight color shift on top. Then we add a edge highlight. So even from a distance, you can still really make out those edges. And then you add some dirt, in this case, like a very soft dirt, to just darken down the crevices a bit and add a bit of shading. Then we add in the shapes. As you can see, they have some pretty geometrical edges in there. And they also, if we look into the mask, they fade out to some degree, so it's not too overpowering, the whole thing. After that, we add a bit of damage, in this case to show the metal underneath. Then we have a bit of scratching as well. And again, as you can see, the metal damage, super simple shapes, also very geometrical. So you can see this on a lot of Overwatch, Fortnite, Valorant stuff, whatnot. Damage shapes always tend to be like obviously depending on the material a bit, because for example, these ones are a bit softer and more detailed, but generally pretty simple shapes that work the best, and obviously focus them on some areas where they actually would be damaged. So maybe not in like a crevice like here, or maybe in here, but obviously on the outside where you might run into something with a weapon like this. Yeah, and then I mean the last few things are just for the things down here, just a few bit of dirt things to integrate it a bit more, because if you look at the way it looked before, it didn't look really too integrated into the whole thing. Okay. Yeah, and basically as soon as you're done with your textures, you could go back to Marmoset, for example, get some preview shots or like your nice renderings for your portfolio or whatnot, and then you're basically done with your asset. So I guess we'll open it up to questions now, so we can go a bit more in depth on some of the things.
Yes, all right. So let's read some questions that are here already. So Nat says, how much polish has a weapon in game in general?
Okay, I think I've touched on this before, but I would say if you're doing a weapon, it's obviously like this one has 9K now. I think somewhere between 10 to 20,000 triangles is like a good benchmark. Obviously, depending on the size. For example, if you look at like a tracer weapon like this, you don't get nearly as much triangles as, let's say, in something like this, where there's a lot of moving parts and it's way more intricate. So obviously it depends. Generally, games have maybe like a overall budget that you don't you cannot go over, or it's maybe even per weapon. So like this weapon can have 10K, this one can have 20K, and yeah. So, but I'd say somewhere in like 10 to 20K, you're probably safe.
There's another question here. The workflow has any type of impact on it when the weapons goes for a first-person shooter instead of a third-person shooter?
Yeah, obviously. Because I'd say in a third-person shooter, there's not really that many constraints. I mean, it probably will be a bit more low poly than in a first-person shooter, but there's not so much to watch out for. Because, for example, if you look at Valorant weapons, since it's a very high-skill competitive game, you always have to make sure that the silhouette is more or less the same. Because if there's the one skin out there, for example, that lets you see more than the other one, at some point, everyone in competitive play will use that one. So you want to have them all even when you look at, let's see if I can find that one. Yeah, if you're looking down the scope, for example, if you have a weapon that gets you like even a bit more room to see stuff around than another one, it's already not really that optimal. So like silhouette shapes, there's a lot of stuff you have to take into consideration. Even like animation, the way the gun moves around, for example, that's all stuff that has to be checked for the finished thing. So it obviously works with the animation that's already there, and also that it doesn't look weird in a way. So because you always have this one canvas, and in a third-person game, it's much freer, and you're not so inside of the action, I would say.
All right. Here is Shukito with a question. It says, for the modeling of characters as accessories or weapons, do you use only ZBrush or also another program?
I would say I actually use mainly Maya for stuff like that, because even if you're doing more organic shapes, for example, if we're talking stylized, then I almost always start with modeling inside of Maya, because ZBrush is super awesome at sculpting, obviously, but getting, for example, if we look at, this one. If you look at the fur down here, this has very distinct shapes. And if you were to just start out in ZBrush, it actually takes quite long in comparison to get like a nice clean shape, while if I just model this thing and then if I need it sculpt over, for example, it's way faster for me. So even like on a guy like this one, where there's, if you look at the boots, for example, I would still start with a modeled base, and only if I have the primary shapes right and all the surfaces and everything looks the way that we want it to look, then you go in and sculpt on top of that. Especially for like complex stuff like this. Anything that's not organic, I won't even go to ZBrush with any of that.
Okay, and one last question here we have is, how do you usually get your reference or to texture some weapon or character armor?
I mean, for reference, you generally get like a concept in the beginning anyways. And so normally you would, like you often see concepts where there's a few like little pictures of different materials, for example, where it's, oh, this is like worn old leather, and then you have a little picture of that. So you kind of know the direction you're going in. But I would say on an existing project, you want to look at what's already there, because it has to work with all the different assets that already exist. So if you, for example, do like a fur coat, if there's a fur coat already in the game, which I'm not sure there was actually in this case, but you'll probably look that up and see how that's done, and try to mimic it so it works style-wise with the other stuff. If you don't have anything to go on, I would say just check visually if it works with all the other stuff that's already there. Even if you're doing fan art, for example, or something for your portfolio, where I say, I want to go into this direction, just look up the assets that already exist and see if you can match that to a certain degree, or make up your own stuff if that's for personal piece, for example. That's also fun.
Okay, we have one more question, and if I am looking to make mechas or semi-human androids, it is not a good option either?
I guess since, I mean, obviously you can do hard surface in ZBrush now for sure, but to be honest, while I like C-Modeler, for example, and having that kind of stuff in ZBrush, I think for me it's still not at a point where I would say it's faster than doing it in Maya. For example, if we look at this one here, on this piece, I actually went ahead and on purpose did everything in ZBrush. So all the roller skates and everything, because I wanted to really try out the whole modeling inside of ZBrush thing. And some stuff is actually way easier in ZBrush, but I would still say, like, on an overall scale, hard surface, I would still model it, unless you have like maybe more of a if you're more doing concepting work, like a lot of people that do, I say, rather rough sketches that you won't bake a normal map off of, but just to get like the shapes and everything into place. There's a lot of stuff you can do really quickly, but yeah, it's difficult to be super exact, I would say. So it's, I guess, do it and see which of the two you like more. But it's a very good idea to be able to do both things anyway. Yeah.
All right, I think those were all the questions that people were asking for now. And this was a great topic. Thank you so much. And we really hope everyone enjoyed it. And thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where can people find you? Just you already are showing us your art station, but any social media you have, people can follow you?
Not really. I guess if you want to reach out to me, just do it through ArtStation. That's
Okay,
the
yeah.
easiest way, I'd say. And yeah, so if you want to get in touch, just write me a message on ArtStation, and
Great.
I'll reply, hopefully.
All right, thank you so much, Stefan, for today, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Everyone,
Thanks for having me.
have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too.
Muy bien.
Bye, guys.
Terminamos
Bye.
aquí. Bye bye. Adiós.